Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this session of Spokane Public Schools Keep Learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for all our first graders out there, and any child who is interested is welcome to join us. My name is Katie Jensen, and I'm a reading interventionist and literacy coach at Stevens Elementary in Spokane Schools, and I will be your teacher for this lesson. I'm so glad you're participating with me today. If you didn't see our previous lesson, you can find it on the KSPS website. You can still tune into today's lesson if you haven't seen any of our others. Today, we'll be learning about gathering text evidence and formulating an opinion. For today's lesson, you'll need a writing utensil and paper. I'll give you a couple of moments to gather your supplies. Let's get started. In our last lesson, we learned about features within our story that made it a fantasy story. There were a lot of things in the garden that could not happen in real life. Our two main characters were animals that acted like people. This is a common theme in fantasy stories. Today, we're going to be taking a closer look at our two characters, Frog and Toad. Good readers analyze or think hard about a story. They find clues called text evidence in the words and pictures that help them understand elements of the story. As we read, we are going to be analyzing Frog and Toad. What are they like? What type of character are they? Are they similar? Are they different? How do you know? At the end of our story, we're going to discuss the text evidence that we found as we were reading. To help gather our evidence, we're going to fill in a T-chart on our two characters as we go. The Garden, From Frog and Toad Together, by Arnold Lobel. Frog was in his garden. Toad came walking by. "What a fine garden you have, Frog," he said. "Yes," said Frog, "it is very nice, but it was hard work." "I wish I had a garden," said Toad. "Here are some flower seeds. Plant them in the ground," said Frog, "and soon you will have a garden." "How soon?" asked Toad. "Quite soon," said Frog. Toad ran home. So here's our T-chart. Our T-chart is going to help us gather our text evidence as we go. I noticed on this first page that Frog seemed to be a good friend. Toad wants to plant a garden, and Frog gives him seeds to help. I think that's something that a good friend would do. He planted the flower seeds. "Now seeds," said Toad, "start growing." Toad walked up and down a few times. The seeds did not start to grow. Toad put his head close to the ground and said loudly, "Now seeds start growing." Toad looked at the ground again. The seeds did not start to grow. Toad put his head very close to the ground and shouted, "Now seeds start growing." Frog came running up the path. "What is all this noise?" he asked. "My seeds will not grow," said Toad. "You are shouting too much," said Frog. "These poor seeds are afraid to grow." "My seeds are afraid to grow?" asked Toad. On this page, we start to learn a little bit more about Toad. So let's add some information to our T-chart. So what word comes to my mind when I see Toad yelling at the ground, waiting for seeds to grow, is that he's kind of impatient. That means he doesn't want to wait for things to happen. He wants them to happen now. Another word that makes me think of Toad is kind of silly. He makes me laugh in this page because we all know that there's no way that yelling at seeds is going to make them grow. So that's funny. Of course, said Frog. Leave them alone for a few days. Let the sun shine on them. Let the rain fall on them. Soon your seeds will start to grow. I'm going to add something about Frog to our chart. On this page, he's being very wise, which means he's being smart. I can tell that Toad kind of looks up to Frog and likes to listen to what he has to say. So I think that Frog is smart and wise. Another trait that I think Frog has is that he is patient. So Toad is not very patient, but Frog is very patient. He has a friend who is upset, and he's taking him for a walk and calming him down and telling him to wait and be patient, and the seeds will grow soon. That night, Toad looked out of his window. Drat, said Toad. My seeds have not started to grow. They must be afraid of the dark. Toad went out into his garden with some candles. I will read the seeds a story, said Toad. Then they will not be afraid. Toad read a long story to his seeds. On this page, I like that Toad, even though he's not doing the right thing for the seeds, he's being really nice. He really wants to help the seeds grow. He thinks they're afraid. So I would add that Toad is kind. Even though that's not really what the seeds need, he wants to go out in the middle of the night and help the seeds not be afraid. And that's a pretty kind thing to do. All the next day, Toad sang songs to his seeds. And all the next day, Toad read poems to his seeds. And all the next day, Toad played music for his seeds. He's doing a lot of work to help his seeds grow. So I'm going to add that Toad, while he's kind of silly, he's determined. That means that he wants those seeds to grow, and he's going to work hard to make sure it happens. Toad looked at the ground. The seeds still did not start to grow. What shall I do? Cried Toad. These must be the most frightened seeds in the whole world. Then Toad felt very tired, and he fell asleep. Toad, Toad, wake up, said Frog. Look at your garden. Toad looked at his garden. Little green plants were coming up out of the ground. I like that here that Frog has come to check on Toad. So he's waking him up and saying, come look at your garden. So I think to come and check in on your friend to see how they're doing is a very thoughtful thing to do. So I'm going to say that Frog is thoughtful. At last, shouted Toad, my seeds have stopped being afraid to grow. And now you will have a nice garden too, said Frog. Yes, said Toad. But you were right, Frog. It was very hard work. We gathered a good amount of text evidence as we were reading today about our two characters. We gathered that Frog was a good friend. He was wise, patient, and thoughtful. And then Toad was impatient, silly, kind, and determined. We knew that Frog was a good friend because of what he did for Toad. He gave him seeds to start his garden. We knew that Toad was impatient because he spent the first little bit of his planting yelling at the ground, wanting his seeds to grow faster. So what we're going to do now with our information is we are going to formulate an opinion. An opinion is how we feel about something. Sometimes fact and opinion can get mistaken for each other. So we're going to go over that really quick before we start our writing. So I have two sentences to look at right now. Frog is a green animal. Then our second sentence says, Frog is a good friend. One of these sentences states a fact, something that can be proven to be true. Do you know which one it is? Frog is a green animal. That's a fact. That means that is true, and it can be proven true. The other sentence, Frog is a good friend, would be considered an opinion because it's how we feel about something. Someone else could feel that Frog is not a good friend. That's their opinion. Let's look at two more sentences to practice. Toad is a hard worker. Toad is growing a garden. Let's start with Toad is a hard worker. Do you think that's fact or opinion? That would be an opinion. Someone else might not feel that Toad is a hard worker. That could be someone's opinion. Toad is growing a garden. Fact or opinion? That would be a fact. We know that Toad is growing a garden in our story. For today's activity, you are going to be formulating your own opinion about our characters. Who is your favorite character? Why? What supporting evidence from the text gives you that opinion? To get started with your opinion paragraph, all you're going to need is a piece of paper and a writing utensil. This piece of paper can be blank, it can be lined, it's whatever you have available to you in your home. To get started, I am going to be thinking about what my opinion is. My opinion was that I liked Frog as my favorite character in the story. So I'm going to start my paragraph with my opinion that Frog is my favorite character in the story. I'm going to need to indent and start with my first word. Frog is my favorite character in the story. So what was my first word? Frog. And I'm going to start that with a capital letter for two reasons. One, because Frog is his name, and two, because it's the first word in my sentence. Okay, so let's go back and reread. My first word is frog. What was my next word? Is. So I'm going to put two finger spaces and then write frog is. We should know that word. Then let's go back and reread again. Frog is my. Good, and that's a sight word, so we should know how to spell that. M-Y. Now, I'm coming to the word favorite, which is a pretty big word. What I like to do when I come to these big words is to clap it out like a syllable. Favorite. So let's go to fave first. Fave. Fave. I hear fave. Then I go to my next syllable. Favorite. Rit. It. Frog is my favorite character. I'll give you the word character because that's a pretty big word and it's hard to spell. I'm going to give that one to you guys. Frog is my favorite character. And then I end my sentence with a period. So this would be my opinion, and I'm telling everyone that my favorite character is Frog. Now, what I do underneath is I support my opinion. So I give evidence from the text about why Frog is my favorite character. So here is where I would start by writing and saying evidence from our T-chart that we were making about Frog and Toad. So one of the reasons I liked Frog is I thought he was a really good friend to Toad. So I'm going to start up here for my second sentence and state my first reason as to why Frog is my favorite character. So I like to use transition words. I'm going to start with a transition word first. And after a transition word, I always put this comma. First, Frog, again with a capital letter because it's his name. Frog is, there's that word is again. Do I have room for take a look. Frog is, I think I don't really have room for it. So that means I'll hop down to the next line, and that's where I'll write the word Frog is a good friend. Friend is kind of tricky. I'm going to sound it out. Friend. Good. To another sight word. And then Toad is a name, so I'm going to capitalize it as well and put a period at the end. After this, I would give more supporting facts with more transition words to finish up my opinion paragraph. Once you've finished your opinion paragraph, make sure to read over it a couple of times. Do you have all your sight words spelled correctly? Have you sounded out all the words that were giving you trouble? Make sure that you have finger spaces, punctuation, capital letters in the appropriate places. Share your work with someone in your home. Tell them what your opinion was of one of our characters. I've enjoyed doing some literacy learning with you today. Thank you for joining me as you keep learning from home. I'll see you next time.